Welcome to Executive Insights for Life Sciences Innovators, and thanks for joining us today. On this podcast, we'll explore leadership, innovation, and growth in the life sciences sector. I'm Don Alexander, founder of GeneCoda, a boutique executive search firm dedicated to connecting visionary leaders with life sciences companies shaping the future of therapeutics and scientific tools. On each episode, we'll dive into candid conversations with industry pioneers, uncovering strategies, insights, and real-world experiences that drive success in our industry. If you're interested in presenting as a guest of a future episode, please drop me a line on LinkedIn. Today, we're pleased to be joined by Mike Stocum, the CEO of Bantam Pharmaceuticals, a company pioneering therapies that target cancer cells through their mitochondria. Mike is an entrepreneurial leader with more than 2 decades of experience spanning science, business development, and venture creation. He's helped guide multiple early-stage companies from idea to into clinical development with a deep focus on building partnerships and advancing innovations that improve patient care. When he's not leading Bantam, Mike enjoys flying as a private pilot. He's currently training for his instrument rating, playing basketball weekly, and spending time with his family, including his new granddaughter. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Don. I appreciate you having me on, and excited to be here and share a little bit about Bantam and something I'm very passionate about, which is developing new medicines for patients.
Fantastic, Mike. Well, let's talk a little bit about your career journey and leadership philosophy as we do in all our episodes. Let me ask you, what inspired your journey into the life sciences industry at large and eventually into oncology?
I think a lot of it happened early on as a kid. I was fascinated by biology. My father was a seventh grade junior high biology teacher, so at an early age, I was cutting onions apart and looking at cell walls and things like that through a microscope that he had in the classroom. But as I, learned through my education in high school and later on in college, I was just fascinated by how systems work within the body, both for humans and animals and plants alike, and really started to feel like late in my college career that I could make a difference by taking my love of science and thinking about how do you project that onto and accomplish big things that can change how we care for patients and how we treat diseases, how we monitor health, et cetera. So it's been a lifelong passion of mine and something that gives me tremendous joy when we have success in this field.
Fantastic, Mike. That's great. A natural curiosity in the field. So you've played leadership roles in startups as well as growth stage ventures rather over your career. What pivotal experiences brought you to Bantam?
So I think there's sort of two levels to that. The sort of base level is I had the tremendous blessing of working in two corporations that were, one was a mid-size, one was a very large corporation. It was the first one was Organon Technica. That company had pieces of it that were split between the pharma and diagnostics world. The pharma world ended up with Schering-Plough and ultimately Merck through various M&As, mergers and acquisitions. And then the diagnostic piece was sold off to bioMérieux, which is still active in the same area where Organon Technica was based in North America, which is Durham, North Carolina. Glaxo Wellcome was my other corporate experience, and that morphed and merged in with SmithKline Beecham to become GSK today. And both of those experiences really introduced me to some amazing people that are still amongst my professional colleagues and close friends, both in the Netherlands and the UK overseas, as well as here locally in the Triangle in North Carolina, where I'm based. And I think that was a foundation that set me on a course. The second part of it was to maybe paint the less rosy side of the corporate world. I felt constrained and had challenges with just kind of playing the corporate game, and maybe wasn't as adept at it as I should have been, and found a love for innovating within those companies, which is what I did in several occasions, but also recognized eventually I had to kind of grow my wings and fly, to use the pilot analogy. And I tried a startup. I failed miserably. Was fired within 4 months. We won't name that startup on the podcast here. They're no longer in existence. But I always love to share that story. Yes, I've been fired, but it led to something good, which turned out to be the Glaxo event. And then after Glaxo, I built my own company, Personalized Medicine Partners, which was a boutique consultancy where I put project teams together that would dedicate themselves to integrating product development, particularly around molecular diagnostics and therapeutics. And it was really an extension of the work I had done in both Organon and Glaxo. So that kind of built my entrepreneurial and innovation side, which then a couple of those opportunities have led from consulting projects into both executive leadership and eventually chief executive officer roles. The current role I have in Bantam, ironically enough, came because my old boss in GlaxoSmithKline, Mike Luther, when I departed my second CEO role at Innovata, which ultimately went on to be sold to NeoGenomics, or acquired by NeoGenomics for a $400 million exit. When I was departing Innovata, I wanted to get back into pharma. And I called Mike and others in my network, but Mike said, "Hey, maybe you could come help me. I'm looking to transition from drug discovery into potentially clinical development. And you've got that connection and ability to move science into products." And so that's what started it. Eventually, Mike departed Bantam, at least as the chief exec. He remains as an advisor, went to Big Pharma, and I assumed the reins at Bantam. I've been running the company now for just over 4 years, 4.5 years.
That's fantastic. It's a really exciting career journey between consulting, bigger organizations, as well as some of the smaller ones, including Bantam that you're now involved with. How is, kind of given that backdrop, Mike, how has your leadership philosophy evolved as you've guided early stage companies, towards clinical impact?
Yeah, that's a great question, Don. Each entity that you lead, whether you be sort of executive level leadership, or whether you're the CEO or even a board member, you have to think about what's the journey projected to be for that company and really sort of customize your leadership for that company. That being said, I tend to gravitate around using more EQ, emotional driven approaches and connections with team members. I'm very big on building leadership skills within the teams, simply because none of us have all the answers. And I heard it said on your, I think it was a podcast, maybe the last one, from the Atomic AI CEO, who I couldn't have said it better. No one in our industry has all the skills to be successful. So if you're going to be successful in our industry in your mission to develop a product or bring a service to market, you must be able to collaborate with others effectively. And you've got to be able to persuade and influence people. And you have to have the basic interactive skills, no matter how smart you are. And so I really try to prioritize that ethos as part of my leadership and look for those people that I can connect with and work with in a professional environment. Now, biotech is messy, innovation is messy, small companies are messy. Is every day a walk in the park? Absolutely not. There are blowups and there are disappointments and there are failures. However, being able to build on those and take the learnings from your failures, make that progression to that next successful milestone, or develop that new insight that came from maybe the downside of something happening, is so critical. And that's why I try to instill in my team. It's okay to have a failure. We just have to learn from it. and be better the next time.
Absolutely. That's great. Yeah, everyone fails in science at some point or another. Got to learn.
If you haven't, you're either not pushing the envelope far enough or you're being untruthful. One of the two. There are always failures. You couldn't, yeah, you nailed it.
That's great, Mike. Well, let's talk a little bit about Bantam's technology, if we can. So, as I understand it, the company's advancing therapies that target energy survival pathways of cancer cells. Maybe if you could, for those listening in today, tuning in, can you explain a little bit how that approach maybe is different from more traditional, I suppose, oncology strategies?
Yeah, so there's a lot of strategies over the years that have been developed to attempt to attack cancer from different angles. And just a brief regression to my background. I worked very early on in the HIV space. And one thing the HIV taught us is you had to hit that virus from multiple angles in order to attack and keep it at bay without it morphing and somehow changing and then going on to kill the patient's immune system. And I like to think I personally have taken that lesson. I think a lot of our cancer development colleagues have taken that lesson to heart and think about cancer in that way. You have to attack it from lots of different angles, or it typically escapes. It may escape anyway. At the end of the day, it's using our same systems that our bodies have used throughout our lives. So you've got to be more clever than the cancer tumor cell. One of the areas that I think is underexplored is how does the tumor cell get its energy to do the things it's doing at sort of an accelerated speed over the normal cells in the body. In other words, cancer cells are outgrowing. That's why you have a tumor if you're unfortunate enough to have cancer. And the key there is something had to provide more energy than is typical within the cell, something to have had to provide more rapid replication of those cells. And these are all mechanisms we can target. And I was part of a cell signaling targeting effort when I was in Glaxo, learned a lot from that. And that is one very ripe area where there have been a lot of drugs developed in the modern days, mostly small molecules that are taken typically orally, that have been very successful, but also many see resistance emerge in those treatment strategies. And one thing I think we found at Bantam is a way to target the tumor cell in a different way. And you can't completely cut off its energy. Otherwise, you'd probably be doing it throughout the body, and that would cause systemic challenges for anybody. But what you can do is find a way to target tumor cells that maybe have a dependency on a certain way of producing energy. And of course, as many of your listeners will know, mitochondria are the powerhouse of the cell, and that's where the cell gets most of its energy. If you can find a way to leverage these mitochondria in tumor cells in a way that's more specific to the tumor cell and not specific to the body at large, then maybe you've got an angle. And that's what we think we have discovered at Bantam. It was a very challenging journey for Bantam. Bantam started with a molecule that had amazing activity in a select subtype of cancer, lymphoma, and a certain type of lymphoma, B-cell lymphoma. And Bantam and the scientific team behind Bantam had to evolve their understanding of why it was working so well, which led us into finding this mechanism that we published. I guess it's about November 2 years ago, or it will be 2 years ago in a couple of months, in Molecular Cancer Therapeutics. And that seminal publication of our mechanism of action really highlights what we've uncovered and how our drug is working through the mitochondria to essentially force a tumor cell to use only one way of producing energy. And in doing so, I guess the best analogy is to make it redline. If you're in your car and you push your tachometer to the yellow portion and you stomp the accelerator even further and pass the red line, the engine can't handle it. And that's what I think we're at a simplistic level seeing in these tumor cells.
That's a really interesting analogy. Thanks for Mike for sharing that. So I guess where do you see cancer cell energetics research making the biggest difference for patients in the next decade? We talked a little bit about clinical impact. So yeah, just curious about any additional thoughts about that.
Yeah, and that's an exciting area, or it is an exciting area, and we've already seen some drugs develop that work through the mitochondria. There are drugs that force apoptosis by working through the mitochondria or program cell death, way of
Mm.
killing off tumor cells. We've seen drugs develop that cut off energy supply, that break stress adaptations. Our particular angle seems to work through the quality control process of the mitochondria. And we have seen recently a drug approved. It's a molecule that Jazz Pharmaceuticals now owns, previously owned by a company called Chimerix, also in the Research Triangle Park. And they did a deal with Jazz to bring that drug to market. So it's early days. It was just approved last month. But we're very excited to see their success because, of course, there's hopefully will also be ours. We target two slightly different mechanisms, but similar concepts through what we believe is mitochondrial quality control. And so I think you're going to see a wave of the research that's been going on in mitochondria, not just in oncology, but in metabolic diseases, of course, for years, in neurosciences and inflammation. I think we're going to see people learn how to gently tweak the mitochondria to get a therapeutic effect. And that is what we believe we're doing with our molecule. More of these are going to enter the clinic just like we have.
Fantastic, Mike. Thanks for that. Beyond oncology, what emerging life sciences trends excite you most right now?
I think there's a couple of really interesting things that are happening in life sciences. So I know the daily headlines are difficult. Capital is more constrained now than it's ever been, certainly more constrained than what we enjoyed 5 years ago when the markets were booming. And there are uncertainties around and changes to how the government agencies fund research in the biomedical sector. But the industry is resilient, and I think we learn to deal with those adaptations and just keep moving forward. I think that to me, the most exciting elements that I see on the horizon, one, the number of different modalities now and how we can alter disease is really amazing. We've gone from small molecules and monoclonal antibodies and morphed into not just those tools, but ways to change cellular behavior through cell therapies. We've found ways to change genetic expression through gene-based therapies. And I think that these areas are exploding in a good way. And I believe we're going to learn more and more about how to change the course of disease. And at the same time, the other major development I see is on the tools side. And I've been part of this industry in my past. But on the tools side, we have more ways than ever to measure the biology. So we have a deeper and ever increasing body of understanding of how cells work and how cells work together and how that contributes to how the body behaves and disease evolves. And I think when you couple both of these pieces with the explosion in artificial intelligence, I think the future is incredibly exciting. And if anything, maybe that's the resourcing that's going to make a difference rather than being dependent on, the exact same level or even continued growth in absolute funding dollars. Maybe we learn to become far more efficient because of these new tools that we have available to us and a better way of using the tools that we've always had.
Absolutely. The inherent understanding of systems biology context is made possible really at a quantum scale, given the technologies we have today and going forward. I mean, truly, some people talk about the next few years as the golden age of medicine. So, Let's switch gears to scaling funding and business strategy a bit if we can. So, what have been, I guess, the biggest challenges in advancing Bantam's pipeline, and how have you navigated those?
Hmm. Um, Great question. Bantam is unique in a couple of ways. It's funded by three individuals who have been able to support the company through its earliest discovery days, all the way through to now we're in the clinic at multiple sites in the US and Canada. We are actually getting ready to expand beyond our initial B-cell lymphoma study into solid tumors. And it's unusual that you find, I'll call them super angels, if you will, that are capable of funding a company at this stage. They're passionate about making a difference in cancer. And, I'm grateful we've had their support given the funding difficulties that a lot of my contemporaries have faced in the market over the last 4 to 5 years. That being said, we do have our challenges. We are entering a clinical area, B-cell lymphoma, that thankfully for patients has had a tremendous amount of pharma focus, including some of the agents or development treatment modalities that I mentioned earlier in the way of cell therapy. So, for instance, many of your listeners will be familiar with CAR T therapy. That's actively used now in B-cell lymphoma treatments. There are advances in bispecific and trispecific antibodies beyond just monoclonal antibodies. There are advances in new mechanism of action, as we talked about a minute ago, as well, including our own. So it's a lot of competition that's making it extremely challenging to enroll studies, and you really have to put your strategic hat on to solve enrollment challenges to be successful in that environment. On the upside, I mentioned earlier we're going into solid tumors, and we're extremely excited about that because we found a biomarker profile that we're very keen on, and we believe may hold promise for selection of patients to find those that are most likely to benefit from Bantam's small molecule, BTM 3566, as we know it. And in fact, I think, and this is something I really love to tease investors with, this holds promise for a tumor agnostic development strategy where you truly can go to any tumor type as long as you can identify the molecular profile and, of course, a clinical positioning for the unmet need and meet that need with both the drug and biomarker combination. So that's kind of our future that we're shooting for, and that has me excited. It's also a challenging road ahead for co-development of a companion diagnostic and a therapeutic. And there's not a lot of regulatory precedence for these types of development pathways in terms of tumor agnostic development. So we'll be learning from some who have tried it and had some success, and we'll also be plowing our own path forward.
Blazing some new trails, no
Yeah.
doubt. So how do you, I guess, balance? You mentioned, it's fortuitous, I suppose. Bantam's got three super angels, as you kind of characterize them, but who are interested, and I think this is important lesson for the audience as well, who are interested in making meaningful contributions to these programs. So they are of means, but also are interested in the subject matter. But how do you balance scientific innovation with regulatory, I suppose, and investor expectations? There are these different aspects that I guess sort of pull as you get further along in your programs. How do you kind of balance those different aspects?
I wish I had all the answers. It'd probably make my job a lot easier. Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's important to have the dialogue with regulators. Early in my career, I had an opportunity when I worked on an innovative team on an HIV asset at Glaxo to interact with some regulators, and I came to appreciate that the regulators don't have the opportunity to see the everyday innovations that we see that are working sort of on the front lines of biotech, whether we be in larger corporate biopharma or whether we be in these small innovative companies. Regardless, innovation's happening everywhere in our industry, and we have to remember regulators don't see that. So having early dialogue with them and sharing your thinking and your evidence. Remember, everything they do has to be evidence-based, it's risk-based, it's risk management, and it's in the with the intention, of course, of protecting the public and making sure the regulators have done an appropriate job of balancing the risk reward of a new treatment or a new test. And I think the sooner we recognize that we're both working towards that same end, the easier those conversations become. But it is probably a lot about the evidence you can bring, the strength of your data, and having those conversations early and often when regulators are receptive to this.
Indeed, indeed. You mentioned, just to draw something on something you said earlier, about the market overall, has been challenging. Your contemporaries, I think, were the words. But I mean, what advice in a more general sense would you give for early stage biotech leaders who are, in fact, seeking funding to further their programs? What lessons would you share from your own experience?
I guess I can share the lessons we're living through currently. Our current super angels, as I refer to them, want us to find additional traditional biotech funding or partnering, because it's time to do that as the asset enters the clinic. And I think the advice I would have for others, um, is you have to make a choice early on right now in today's market. Are you going to be a platform, or are you going to be an asset centric type of company? And I do see there's two different funding mechanisms for those. We are seeing reasonable investment in tech platforms where they have a great story to tell. It doesn't mean everybody gets funded. In fact, it's very limited right now. So, having strong scientific founders along with you for the ride, having a track record, making the right connections with investors, being politely persistent, as I call it, and staying in front of investors and keep them up to date, and build the relationship as you make progress on your platform, all goes a long way toward successful financing in the future. And we've had a couple of those in the triangle. I'll call out Tavros in particular, which did a great job building a platform, building a partnership with a subsidiary of Bayer. And, it's that their success shows. On the asset side, where we are, I think the most important thing we have to do is get patients into our study and show the impact of our medicine and that it has therapeutic activity. All the traditional things that pharma will want to see, it's safe enough as a cancer drug, or it's got a therapeutic index that's reasonable. In other words, you can treat at therapeutically effective doses while having, minimal safety effects, that are appropriate for the patient population you're treating, and do that as quickly as possible. So that's no small task today. As I mentioned, there's a lot of competition, but really being able to show that evidence and then also a pathway for where that program is headed, in that it meets an unmet medical need, ultimately is something regulators could approve and targets a reasonably sized commercial market. Those are all sort of the classic pharma partnering requirements that you need to be able to show through your program. If you're building the company for a long-term build, where you're going to build out a sales team and so forth, I think that's really become the rarity today. And I think most of us recognize there are excellent partners out there, and make connections with those, and invariably multiples of them will have needs that your compound should meet if you do the things we talked about a few minutes ago, or your portfolio of molecules if you happen to be blessed with a portfolio of molecules. But key is to keep the capital coming in, to keep the development train moving, for asset-centric companies like ourselves.
Indeed, Mike. Thank you for that. Let's talk a little bit about any upcoming milestones or collaborations that, of course, could be disclosed, but anything that you're particularly excited about. You mentioned the publication, obviously, earlier. the trial. Anything coming up that you're particularly excited about?
Two things actually we're super excited about. One is we announced a collaboration and actually a poster back at an AACR general meeting last year with MD Anderson and a very notable thought leader there, Dr. Michael Wong. Um, he's been a huge champion for us. He has our study up and running now. He is our global principal investigator in B-cell lymphoma, and the milestone of getting the first patient in, whether it's there or at one of the Canadian sites, is going to be a huge milestone for us, and we know that's coming soon. I'm delighted that we could work with a premier institution like MD Anderson. That's just not
Of course.
an opportunity you have every company you run. So really grateful for their support and in particular Dr. Wong's interest in our program. The second milestone is we will be filing an IND application, a secondary IND for solid tumors, and probably eventually in leukemias as well. That combined with some of our internal research to better understand the solid tumor environment, where we've seen some very promising tumor regressions occur in a couple of tumor types already, and we're working to classify others that may have the similar effect. That's going to be the next big milestone. Also, our potential pharma partners have been asking for that type of data, and we'll be able to get it once we get our IND open and our study set up. And we expect to do that both in Canada and the US, much like with the B-cell lymphoma strategy. So those are two huge milestones. We should have both of them accomplished sometime late this year, early next year, and be underway in both of those areas. So I think it broadens our opportunity from a commercial perspective and also from a partnering perspective.
Brilliant. Congratulations on both of those. Are there, I guess, any final thoughts, Mike, or advice that you'd like to share with our audience? Maybe something I haven't asked today.
I think one of the if you will, blessings of a long career is you have the opportunity to look back and appreciate some of the steps along the way that at the time may have felt burdensome or even maybe disappointing, or sometimes you felt elation, but savor each of those moments, because you realize when you look back, those are the formative experiences that help you when you're working in tough environments like we are now. And it gives you the fortitude to keep going, knowing that you're going to be able to make a difference when you bring that medicine to market or that test to market. And I think as I look back, I'm super excited about the people I met over the years and have kept those network connections together. And I'm really proud that some of the medicines and tests that I've worked on have paid lives and made a difference. And to me, that's more rewarding than anything else you can receive in our industry. So, I think just a reminder in the days that can feel heavy, just stop and remember the accomplishments and the impact you've made, and then, double down and keep going, because you're going to make it happen. In the end, you just got to stay focused.
Indeed, Mike, that's great. How can listeners best connect with you and follow Bantam's progress going forward?
So we are a very small company, so our website updates probably aren't as frequent as they should be. But we do have relevant contact information on our website, and we do share presentations, publications, et cetera, as they come out. So our website, bantampharma.com, is a great place to do that. We are also on LinkedIn as Bantam Pharma. And of course, people can reach out to me directly as well through my LinkedIn page and connect that way. I generally am as responsive as I can be to the messages there within a few days to at most a week. So I try to keep a close eye on that account.
Fantastic, Mike. Thank you. Well, that wraps up this episode of Executive Insights for Life Sciences Innovators. I appreciate you tuning in and hope that you found today's conversation valuable. If you enjoyed the discussion, please be sure to leave a review and share it with your network. Please also mark your calendars for October 6th at 1 o'clock with Jim Buck at MedCura. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you